So thanks for joining us today. I am Jacob Pegg, the Director of Product for SalesPad, and we're going to talk about credit card processing within SalesPad. So we're going to go through the agenda real quick and just kind of point out, highlight some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So first things we're going to look at is just SalesPad and PayFabric overview. Just what is PayFabric, what does it do within SalesPad? EMV technology, or chip and pin. Chip and signature is a couple of different names that are used when referring to EMV. Merchant services and level 3 processing. Card control to PayFabric migration. And then we're going to do a demo of both SalesPad desktop for GP and then SalesPad mobile, and then processing payments within both of those. And then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Also throughout this presentation, if you have questions, don't hesitate to put those in the chat box. We've got a team that are replying to those. Even throughout the demo, you can put those questions in. We'll have people answering those throughout the demo as well. So let's talk about SalesPad Desktop and PayFabric. So PayFabric is a product that is owned by a company called Notice Technology. So you may hear us throughout this presentation or at other times when interacting with your sales rep where we're talking about Notice. And so Notice and PayFabric are somewhat interchangeable terms that we use, but PayFabric is the service or the product that they offer. Notice Technologies is the company that provides that application. And so what does that allow, or by using PayFabric, what does that allow us to do? So there's a couple of things. One is it allows us to both authorize and charge credit cards. So we are processing those card present or card not present transactions directly within SalesPad through PayFabric. So unlike using card control, it works directly within SalesPad. It opens up within a SalesPad screen, and so you're not having to jump to a separate application when processing those transactions. It also alleviates a lot of the major challenges with PCI compliance. So PayFabric is a PA-DSS validated solution, which means that it aids you as the customer when going through PCI compliance. You can tick off those additional boxes that you meet those requirements because you're using a PA-DSS validated solution. So it also supports most gateway and processors. So you can bring your own processors or gateways over to PayFabric. So there's a list of them that they support on their website. So if you wanted to take a look at those, you could pick and choose from that list. So if you have an authorized.net or Chase Payment Tech processor that you're already using, there's a very good likelihood that you can go ahead and bring that with you over to PayFabric and use that within SalesPad. At the same time, PayFabric also offers their own PayFabric solution using First Data and using Notice Merchant Services that does have some additional benefits that we'll talk about shortly. Along with that, you also get a customer wallet. So we can do we have the ability to, on the customer card within SalesPad Desktop, you can add a credit card and store that card information essentially as a token associated to that customer. Now that information is not stored within SalesPad anywhere. Again, by using PayFabric, that does essentially take SalesPad out of scope for PCI compliance because we are never touching unencrypted card data. It is all handled through PayFabric in their screens. And that includes the customer wallet, so being able to store those cards that you can use at later dates on transactions. We also allow for doing batch capturing, and so that allows us to, by using the SalesPad workflow, take multiple transactions and capture those at one time or through a single click. And so if you have multiple documents that you have picked, packed, and shipped, and now you had pre-auths on them and you're ready to capture those pre-auths, then you can do that as a batch process within SalesPad. And then along with that, we get Emv Support. So for those card-present transactions where it is a chip card, so it has the little chip built into the credit card itself, we can support those EMV devices for processing those card-present transactions. One other note I will point out is PayFabric, or for PayFabric, there is no additional charge from SalesPad for the PayFabric or for using the PayFabric service. Now there are charges that you would incur through PayFabric and through their merchant services if you're using them as their merchant service provider. But those are outside of SalesPad. Those are things you are likely already paying through whatever other processor or gateway you may be using, like authorized.net or PayFlow Pro. So again, unlike card control, there's no additional charge to use those credit card or to process credit cards directly within SalesPad using PayFabric. One other thing I'll point out as well, for to make use of PayFabric. So this is not new for us. This wasn't something we just released. PayFabric has been in SalesPad since SalesPad 4.5 or SalesPad Desktop 4.5. So you need to be on a version of desktop later than 4.5. And then if you want to do EMV processing within mobile or within desktop, then on mobile you need to be on 1.3.26 dot something. So anything newer, any version of that you need to work on. I'll be showing 1.3.26.2. That's available on the App Store, so you can go out and make use of that or get that latest version to process those EMV transactions through mobile. For EMV transactions within SalesPad Desktop, you need to be on 4.6.0 or newer. And I believe it was 4.6.0.11, I believe that it actually came out in. So you need to be on that version or newer to process EMV transactions directly within SalesPad Desktop. So if we take a look, we've got a graphical diagram here of how SalesPad Desktop and mobile interact with, in this case, a card-present transaction or an EMV device with PayFabric. So the biggest point here that we need to look at or point out is that both your mobile device and or your desktop computer or whatever you're running SalesPad Desktop on have to be on the same network as your EMV device. So they have to be able to see each other and communicate to each other. And the reason for that is how PayFabric interacts with that device. There is local scripting that is ran on the device itself, whether that's the mobile device or in SalesPad Desktop, that then interacts directly to that EMV device. And so they have to be able to talk to each other on the same network. Just the fact that they may both have internet connectivity doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to work together. And then, so then PayFabric interacts with the EMV device. The EMV device then communicates out to the payment processor, approves or declines the charge or the credit card transaction, and then communicates that back to PayFabric, ultimately back into SalesPad, and lets the user know whether or not that transaction was accepted or declined. So with the EMV support, there's a couple of different devices that we are working with. Right now, both of those are PAX devices. There's the PAX D210 and then the PAX S300. Both of those support multiple different connectivity options. The two that we will work with, both of them have Bluetooth support, but PayFabric does not support EMV Bluetooth devices. So we need to make sure that those are either wired on your wired network or connected to your wireless network. So those devices allowed for card-present transactions, which means the customer, you are taking the credit card, you physically have the credit card in hand, and it's either a swipe or a chip card. And the reason we want to look at supporting, or we wanted to support the EMV side of it, is around the fraud liability shift that happened back, I guess it was last October. What happened is the Visas and MasterCards of the world got together at PCI Security Council, and they made the determination that the least secure point within the credit card processing or that card transaction flow is who becomes liable for a fraudulent transaction. And so if you are not using an EMV compliant device, meaning you are only using a magnetic strip reader, and you process a transaction that comes back to be fraudulent, then that liability falls on you. You're responsible for refunding the money to the actual owner of the card. So there's a couple of things that you just really need to look at then. One is, what types of transactions are you running through a card present scenario? And are you as a company willing to take on that burden of that liability if you decide to not use EMV? So that really is a company by company decision. A lot of the banks and PCI, if you're going through PCI compliance, they're going to push users towards those EMV devices. But again, it is ultimately up to the customer or the company to decide if that's something that they want to support. The other caveat here for EMV support is you must be using PayFabric and Notice Merchant Services together. So if you are using, and that's for EMV support. So if you're using or brought your own processor to PayFabric and you are not using the merchant services through Notice, EMV support will not work for you. And so that's around the PayFabric side of it. That's a requirement that they have. So why would you use Notice Merchant Services? So one of the biggest things for using Notice Merchant Services along with Notice Pay Fabric is level 3 processing. And so level 3 processing means that you are getting the absolute best rate for those transactions that you can get. Those transactions are considered lower risk transactions, therefore you're allowed to get a better rate on those transactions. Typically those are business to business transactions using a business card, so a personal credit card. If you have just walk-in customers that are using their own personal card, those aren't going to get those level 3 rates. But if you're doing B2B business, you can make use of those level 3 processing rates by using Notice Merchant Services. If you want to understand level 3 processing a little bit better, go ahead and check out our blog. So it's what level 3 credit card processing is and why it matters. And that's at blog.salespad.net. So what does that mean now for our existing card control customers that are using SalesPad and card control? So there is a path, there's a migration path to go from card control to Pay Fabric. So even stepping back a little bit further, so card control, if you were using it before, you all understand and know some of the pain that you had with running a separate application to manage credit cards outside of SalesPad. If you have been around SalesPad long enough, you may even remember prior to card control where credit card processing was built directly within SalesPad itself. You didn't have to go outside of SalesPad to run your cards. What we have done with Pay Fabric and partnering with Notice is getting back to that style of credit card processing, back to what it was prior to card control, where you can run those cards directly within SalesPad, and it doesn't feel like you're accessing a separate application or jumping to a separate application, and you don't have to have any additional software installed on each client computer to process those cards. And so we started the relationship with Notice. Notice has been in the credit card processing business for quite some time. They have products that work directly with Microsoft Dynamics GP, and so we partnered with them. It was there was a large investment on our side year over year for us to stay current with our PADSS validation for card control, and so we made the decision to partner with Notice, an expert in credit card processing, move that functionality over to them, let them own that process, and then let us get back to what we're good at with the SalesPad desktop side of it, where we're managing your inventory, your sales transactions, and those things. And so that is why it allows us to remove that additional charge that we had in place for card control before and use Pay Fabric at no additional charge from SalesPad. So again, you'll have charges with Notice and Pay Fabric if you're using their Pay Fabric gateway, just like you would if you were using Authorize.net or Chase Payment Tech or any of those other gateways as well. So what does that mean for those card control users then? So after October 29th of 2019, our PADSS validation expires for card control. That doesn't mean it's suddenly going to stop running or stop working or processing cards or anything like that. It just means that if you were PCI compliant because you were using card control, which was a PADSS validated solution, at that point in time, you are no longer in compliance for your PCI standards because that solution has now expired. So again, Pay Fabric is PADSS validated, so if you do migrate to Pay Fabric, you still can continue to be compliant with that PCI compliance. But again, it doesn't mean that card control will just stop working after October 29th. That is a decision that you as customers will have to decide what you want to do. Is it okay that you are no longer in PCI compliance, or is that something that you need to maintain and move to a PADSS validated solution like Pay Fabric? We know that it's cumbersome to have to change solutions, so we have some utilities in place that will help you migrate from card control to Pay Fabric. Those, just go ahead and reach out to us, reach out to your sales rep. They will be able to get that lined up to where they can have our support team or our implementation team work with you to do that migration. And then they'll be able to discuss any additional training or things like that that you may need to have in place to convert over to Pay Fabric. So again, just reach out, hit up your sales rep, call into support, and talk through that process with them, and they'll be able to help you out with that. So let's go ahead and start doing a demo. We'll jump over into SalesPad Desktop. Also, if you have any additional questions, feel free to post those in the box throughout the demo, and we'll have people standing by being able to answer those for you while we're going through the demo. All right, so we're going to take a look at SalesPad Desktop and processing credit card transactions within Desktop through PayFabric. Again, I do want to point out you need to be on version 4.5 or later for PayFabric, or if you want EMV, then you need to be on 4.6.0.11 or 12, somewhere around there. Again, if you have questions, if you need that EMV support, reach out to that sales rep or our support team, and they'll be able to get you the exact version number that you need. So I'm inside of SalesPad Desktop right now. I'm on the customer card. I did want to go ahead and just point out the PayFabric wallet. So there are two new tabs that show up within SalesPad Desktop. On the customer card, we have the PayFabric wallet, and we also have the PayFabric transactions tab, which I'll point out here in just a minute. But in this case, I have a card that shows up that I have already stored for this customer for this wallet. As you can see, I've got my card information, I've got my expiration date, the card holder name, and then I have the card holder or the card address that I can store with this card. And then I can also flag this card as it is the default card, which means it will show up as or at the top of the list whenever we try to process a credit card transaction through a specific sales document. So again, I have security that I can control here of who can edit this, if the tab is even visible, if they can add cards, delete cards, things like that. The one thing I will say though is at no point will you be able to see the unencrypted card within PayFabric. And again, that is by design by PayFabric. So the other tab that we have here is that PayFabric transactions tab. So as we run transactions, sales transactions for this customer, we can see those logged on this customer card as well. So again, if you were a previous card control customer, a lot of these things are going to be familiar, just the tabs have been renamed for PayFabric. So if I create a new sales order, I'm going to add a couple line items to that sales order, and then we're going to process a credit card transaction. So I'll add a couple items here that we can sell to this customer. So we have this item I've put in at $55.76. We're going to sell 3 of them. That gives us a document total of $167.28. Again, if we had tax or any of those things like that, those would get added into that sales document total. And then at that point, I am now ready to process a credit card transaction. So very similar to how you would use card control, I click into the payment screen, and we'll see a couple of new things that show here. The biggest one is the PayFabric tab. And again, you can control, in this case, I have the PayFabric tab showing up. I also have the credit card tab showing up, which is for manual credit card entry. So again, if I was processing card through a separate standalone terminal or through a web-based virtual terminal, I could key those in there. That you could completely turn off if you didn't use that type of process. And then you would only have the PayFabric tab and then the cash and check tab. So again, we have the ability to do authorizations. We can do charges. So that's standard functionality. So if I click the new charge screen, this is going to pop up my actual credit card transaction screen. All of this information is pre-filled out for me based off of how I have my setup in PayFabric. Now in this case, my PayFabric instance is not set up or is only set up to support card not present transactions. If you had or needed the support for both types of transactions, card present and card not present, then you would get a slightly different screen initially based off of your PayFabric setup when you click on that process transaction button. So at that point, you would actually be able to switch between processing a card not present transaction or switch over to processing a transaction through an EMV device. And so that is a possibility through just a regular sales document within SalesPad Desktop. You could do it that way through counter sales. And then mobile, you could do it you could do it that way as well, just depending on how you have that set up. So if we were to jump over and take a look at the PayFabric screen, this is where you would go to set up that payment gateway name. You would set up the actual profile that you're using. In this case, I'm using a testauthorized.net account. And so you would set all of that up over here. And again, this is all through the Notice PayFabric. If I were to take a look at the wallet, you would be able to see here's that Blue Yonder wallet that I pointed out earlier off the customer card. So again, we're back over on the credit card transaction. I have my information filled out. So it pulls in my sales document transaction amount and then my default currency that I'm using. It defaults in the transaction type. We actually have that grayed out because, again, if you are doing a pre-authorization versus a charge, it will change the transaction type. You're picking that button, so we're going ahead and setting that on the screen for you by default, and you can't change that. And then I have my wallet drop down. In this case, I can use an existing card, which will then populate that information for me, or I can clear that out and just free type in a new card at that point. And I can save that. If I'm marked it as a default credit card, it'll allow me to save it back into the customer wallet. And then at the bottom of the screen, we can process a transaction. And then this sends that information out to PayFabric, and it lets us know that the transaction has been approved. And at that point, it will write it back into SalesPad and into, in this case, ultimately into GP. So, and as you can see there, it shows up in my grid, and it's showing that it is now saved. If we were to flip over to GP, that transaction would show in GP as well. And then you can see your processor log that it had been approved. So if there was any questions, we could also void this transaction, and if it's a later date, we could actually credit this transaction. Once I close this, again, it's going to update the payment screen or the payment field on the sales document, showing that the payment has been captured. So again, that's the flow. It's a little more, or it feels a little more integrated when using PayFabric than if you were using something like Card Control before and you had to jump over, it popped over to another screen. So again, going back to getting the credit card processing functionality to where it feels like it's more integrated directly within SalesPad, and we use PayFabric to do that. So now we're going to take a look over on the mobile device and how we process a transaction over there. All right, so let's take a look at SalesPad Desktop Mobile, processing credit cards there. If you'll see on the screen, I have version 1.3.26.2. I downloaded this off of the App Store yesterday, actually. So I know it's out there. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in to my mobile server. So I have PayFabric set up within your mobile server. So there you set up your device ID, your other information about the device that you are going to be processing credit cards with. If you are using a EMV device, you would set that up there as well. And those would then show up on the mobile side of it also. So in this case, I'm just going to go into a customer. I am going to find my Blue Yonder customer. Go ahead and select them on the screen. And we're going to go into, as you can see, we have their customer wallet that shows up in mobile as well. So I see my existing wallet from SalesPad Desktop that we looked at earlier. I can also add an additional card here. So if I have a sales rep that is out on the road visiting customers and they need to record a new card for this customer that may be used for this order and then potentially for future orders, I could go ahead and add that card here as well. And so again, the idea is that the less that your users are having to interact with unencrypted card data, the better. So I'm going to go ahead and back up. Let me go back into that customer actually. And we are going to pull up some sales documents for that customer. So the first one we're going to take a look at, this one already has a payment on it. And I know that by, if I look at this document and go into the payments option, I see a PayFabric payment that's been applied. I see the card type, in this case a Visa, and I see the last 4 digits of the card number that were used. So again, sales reps on the road visiting a customer, they have questions on an order, you can pull up that order. The customer needs to know, had they pay for it, you can quickly see that information on that document as well. If, in this case, I need to either create a new order or add a payment to an existing order, I'm going to pull up that order, go back into the payment screen. In this case, there's no payment on the transaction. I'm going to go ahead and click on Enter Amount. And I have Notice PayFabric as an option on this payment entry screen. I'm going to do a new charge. And this is going to open up my PayFabric processing screen. So again, it looks like it is part of the app itself. It is that single source. I'm not having to jump to another app. I'm not having to do something separate. In this case, I am processing a card not present transaction. So $27.40 is my document amount. I can go ahead and select a card out of my wallet. So I'm going to go ahead and take that card. It fills that in for me. I can key in the CVV2 field if I need to, and again, that's based off your setup, whether or not you see that. I can see address information, and I can go ahead and process that transaction, which again sends the transaction out to PayFabric. I get a message back that it's been approved or declined, and in this case it was approved, and then it's going to save that payment back onto the sales document. So again, that was processing a transaction in a card not present environment. We do have support for processing transactions with those EMV devices off of mobile. And so if we have something like this, which is the S300, so we can use this type of device. And so again, this one is not wireless. This one will need to be plugged into the wall or into a wired network. So not a great example of using one for a mobile environment. But the D210 is battery powered. It can operate off of a wireless, so you can tie it to a mobile hotspot and operate that way. But you would do the same type of thing. You would go ahead and pull up a sales transaction. At the pay fabric screen or payment screen, you would be able to then select the device that you're going to use. And so here at this screen, you would be able to pick your device. At that time, you'd be able to I only have one set up, so that's why it takes you directly into the process of transaction screen. Otherwise, you'd have this screen with two large boxes, left and right, one for the EMV device, one for pay fabric itself, for card not present transaction. So if you select that device, you would go ahead and then insert your card, or select that option on the pay fabric screen, insert your card into the EMV device, and process that transaction there. So we would then communicate the dollar amount over to the EMV device, what you need to charge. They would process it there, then we pay fabric screen would get a communication back from the device saying whether or not the card was accepted or declined, and then at that point it would save the transaction, if accepted, back onto the sales transaction. So again, you have that ability to process both card not present and card present transactions on that mobile device, using that EMV device if you want to do card present, or using just pay fabric if you're doing card not present transactions. All right, so that is what processing those transactions look like in both mobile and in desktop. We're going to stick around for a little bit and answer questions. Go ahead and post those questions in the message box. We'll reply to those immediately, get back to you. Also, don't hesitate if you have additional questions to reach out to both your sales rep and or our support. And you can also go onto our website. There's a lot of good information on our website, including both our blog posts and then our support documentation as well. So thanks for attending, and we look forward to hearing more from you guys about processing credit cards.